episode of the podcast, we have a really special guest. He's been a longtime mentor of mine, one of my very good friends. We've Coach Tim Flynn. Coach Tim Flynn is the current coach at West Virginia University. He was the coach for 21 years at Edinboro University. He's a former NCAA Coach of the Year, Win Magazine Dan Gable Coach of the Year. He's coached 3 different NCAA champions, 8 different NCAA runner-ups, and 40 different NCAA All-Americans. He's worked with Olympians, Olympic champions, and UFC fighters. He's one of the most respected coaches in the sport. He's got a vast amount of knowledge on anything training, mindset. He's just a great mentor, great coach, and we're really excited to have him on. Like we said, we have a very special guest to the podcast. We have one of my personal mentors, good friend, one of the best guys I know. Coach Tim Flynn is the current head coach at West Virginia University, one of the most respected people in the sport, longtime coach, Edinboro University, and all-around great guy. Thanks for coming on, Tim. We really appreciate this.
Thanks for having me. Kind of sound like Bruce when you say all around great guy.
All around great guy. Yeah, Bruce Baumgartner. We'll get into that too. So how's everything going in West Virginia? You're in preseason right now?
Yes. Conditioning. So they get 8 hours of weightlifting, conditioning like running, and then you can do a few hours of skill instruction, but you can do 8 hours a week up until October 10th.
Now that's just like the NCAA compliance. That's every school?
Yeah, every school. October 10 is the first day you can practice.
Okay. And then they do like preseason stuff. Has that changed over the years at all for you? Like not in terms of compliance, but in terms of your philosophy, like how you train people?
No, I think we still do some running and try to get them, I think now it's just, as people evolve and sport evolves, kids are, staying up in the summer more and more and doing more training in the summer. So we've had to tinker with some stuff, but we still do, we probably don't do as much running in the preseason, but we do like 3 times a week, and we'll lift 3 times a week, and we'll do like 2 days of skill instruction in the room. So we're probably running a touch less.
Yeah. With your mindset going into the season, is everything focused on being the best one weekend in March, like at the NCAA tournament, or how much emphasis nowadays? I feel like teams, and I'm outside of the sport of college wrestling, but I feel like dual meets have people sit some of their best guys. You'll see guys going into the NCAA tournament with like 12 matches. How much stock do you put into like the season?
Yeah. I put a lot of stock into it, maybe because we haven't had so much success the last couple of years, but we don't sit anyone. The only time I sit someone is if the trainer says he can't wrestle. So, for everybody, I know there's a lot of wrestling fans that are like, oh, coaches are doing this or that. I don't know what coaches they're talking about. I go to the trainer. I'm like, can he wrestle? If he can, he's in. If he says he's out, he's out. I don't. And that way it's simple for me. It's like, I think they can compete 15 times, whatever the dates are, 16, times a year. But to answer your question, the thrust of we just focus on today. I think our guys, we're not at a level yet where we got to focus on getting better today. And I think, the NCAA tournament is so far in the future, and, our program is building. So the dual meets are important. They're really important to me.
Because you have to have those wins so you could recruit better guys, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to show some growth in your program, and these are all like little tests. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It not like it's a little different than the UFC, but you can't just blow all these little fights and only do well in the title fight. Well, you're never going to get the title fight if you don't kind of win all these other ones, right? So we got to focus on the day-to-day and on the duels.
We have a lot of our listeners. I don't want to say fan base, but our listeners are from like the jiu-jitsu world. And that's kind of the world that we're in now, jiu-jitsu. And obviously Caitlin's in the UFC world. But it seems like, especially in jiu-jitsu, there's some guys that reach a certain level and then they only do like super fights, or even young kids that they are so-called prodigies or whatever, then they don't do the little tournaments anymore, and they just wait for the like the super fight. Like, I want to do good at the ADCC championships or the trials. Like, I've always kind of been under the mindset of like, you have to compete a lot, because I think that like competition is as much of a skill as a double leg is. Like, knowing how to compete and knowing how to warm up and knowing how to stay focused for 3 or 4 matches. I think that that's as important as the actual skills. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think as you're growing, I think it's really important to compete and to see where you are and to learn how to compete and all those things you said. I think when you get to some level, and that might be a different level for each person, but maybe it's less important for David Taylor, as Olympic champion, world champion, to compete X number of times a year.
Right.
He doesn't need that as much, maybe. And you do see, I remember watching Bruce, and Bruce didn't compete as much, later in his career. You hit a tournament or two, then the world championships, maybe the World Cup. So maybe you don't need as much, but I definitely think when you're growing and learning and trying to climb the ladder, competition, I think, is good.
I think so too. And I think, especially for young athletes, I think they see what, like you said, David Taylor, Jordan Burroughs, what they do, and the fact that they sit until the finals. Like, if you place at the Olympics, now you sit until the finals. You're in the finals of the U.S. Open or the World Team Trials. And at that level, I think you're right. But getting to that level, I think you need to compete all the time. I think people miss that. Like, when Caitlin's done how many karate matches and jiu-jitsu tournaments her whole life. Yeah. When she's at, like, I've never seen someone as, like, mentally, like, fight week doesn't affect her at all. Like, she's like ice in her veins, but because she's competed like thousands of times. I mean, probably thousands of times.
Yeah, I think sometimes, like what you were saying, how some of those, like David Taylor, Bruce, like they compete less, and I think newer, whether in any of those sports, newer guys, they come up and they see that, so they want to do what they're doing because they're the best. And then, but I think they use that as an excuse. I think it's not the lower level people; it's the people that are like could be really good and people are talking about, so they're in that same, like, the upper end of talent, but I think they use that as an excuse because they don't want to risk losing to a match where they should win. So they just save it for the big events. So that way it's like, well, if I lose at the big event, I'm in the big, I'm number 2. It's fine. But if I do all these different competitions and lose to some random person that I shouldn't have, then it'll look bad. So I think they kind of like use the better people that are competing less as like an excuse to not have to worry about like competing against someone.
I agree. But I think those type of people, they're always looking for a reason to do what they want to do. Like, well, I saw Kyle eat a Snickers bar, so I can eat Snickers. It's okay. Well, this guy, drinks beer all the time, or he goes out and parties all the time and he still wins, so I can. And at the end of the day, if you're going to be that type of athlete where you just pick the worst traits in everybody or the thing that you want to do, I've always thought what an athlete should do is find someone that has had success in some way themselves or has coached people who have had success, and then just listen and trust them. You got to find someone you trust and then follow a system. And there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, right? I'm not saying my way is the only way, but I do think people try to do it their own way before they know where they're going, right? So it's like, well, I'm going to do what she does now because that she's successful. Well, you've competed 9 million times. I just heard. So it's like not doing what she did.
Right.
You know, you're doing what she's doing now, later in her career. And you've missed all the seasoning, all the grinding, the practices, the competition. So yeah, I think athletes like that, they may never be super successful, you know, because they're always looking for just a reason to do what they want to do.
Yeah. So anytime with preparation and stuff, I always there's an interview that you did when Flow Wrestling had like just like a portable camera. It was probably like the first interview ever, and I've referenced this before, but now that we have you on, and it's kind of a common debate in the wrestling world, jiu-jitsu world. They'll say, and I'm gonna steal their question, but I know your answer, but I just want your take on it again. People say like it's all mental. It's all mental. Physical or mental? What's how do you distinguish what's more important? I love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, people who say that I think are assuming that the physical is already there. Because so if it's all mental, you would see people like me in the NBA, right? But I'm 5'7" at the most, not overly fast. It's not happening. And it can't be all mental. There's just no way. I think what people mean to say is at this level of athleticism, it's mental. And yes, there's a lot of people with the same physical attributes as Jordan Burroughs, but they don't have the mental side. But I can tell you, we have really, really, really tough kids, and you've coached a million of them, right? You guys have seen a million of them that are so tough and so disciplined, but they're not very good, and they don't have. And it's sad actually, and you wish those people had more ability. But people who say it's all mental, yeah, I just there's no way. I mean, look at the people who win. They're gifted athletes, right? Even like, you know, Conor McGregor said, oh, it's all hard work or whatever. I don't know. He hits people and they fall down. Other people hit people and they just keep, right? And so there's something there, right? And so it's not all mental. I think you need a little of this.
Yeah, I remember you said the physical has to come first, and then all things equal, once you get to a certain level, I think you described it as once you're in the top 20 in NCAAs, or call it for UFC, once you're a top 10 guy, then maybe it could be.
Or because that's why they say sometimes like the top fighters are like, you know, this person won. They're like, but if they fought again tomorrow, it might be the other way around. You know, at the very top, sometimes it just comes to like who does better on that day, which in turn I think is a lot of mental.
Agreed. I 100% agree. When you're, and I won't even say at the top, when you have equal people, the mind really comes into play, right? But when I'm really, really, really tough, right? And say I'm way more mentally tough than Kyle, right? I'm just so tough and he's just so weak. If we wrestle, fight, he kills me because he's 220-pound monster. The mental has nothing to do with that part of it, right? So there, and I know that's a stupid example because we're different weight classes, but it's not all the mind. It's like, yeah, physically, even I guess at some high levels, there's just super freaks out there that they're hard to beat regardless.
Yeah.
You know, so there's definitely that aspect to it.
So how do you coach someone who isn't the most physically gifted? How do you keep them positive so they can believe that, well, I'm not that gifted, I'm not that athletic, but I can eventually get there? How do you keep staying positive on that person so they can reach their goals?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you train all those areas, right? You train the skill, you train the conditioning, you train, you know, the strength. Obviously, I may not be a fast twitch guy, but I can get that much quicker, right? So you're constantly training all those areas. In our sport, in many sports, conditioning is a factor. So then that's where game planning, um, trying to commit to a style like, hey, I, when I wrestled, I had to try to keep the matches closer so that we could get into later periods and maybe to where we could do some top and bottom wrestling where I could get a hold of somebody and get into a position I'm good at. So that's where I think more coaching and more being able to follow a plan, but you're always training those other areas, trying to improve your conditioning, your strength and conditioning, your skills, and obviously, I think if you can just maybe I fight you and you're just a little bit off, like uh, Caitlin was saying, and then I'm a little less of an athlete, but you're a little off, and I get you into the later rounds. Now conditioning, now the mental part comes into play, right? But yeah, but I do, I'll just say it again because you asked the question. If we're just so far apart physically, unless you're just way off, and I can get you so tired, I'm going to have a hard time winning.
Yeah, because you have to be. I mean, if you get tech falled in 30 seconds, then you don't have time to for conditioning to play a part, right? Because conditioning kind of is the great equalizer. If you're exhausted and I'm not, I could maybe win.
Yes, and that's where, if again, game plan, if you can go out in wrestling and grab someone's wrist and slow them down and keep the score close. And I don't know what you're doing fighting because someone's swinging at your head. I don't know how to get them tired, run around. I don't know. But yeah, you do have a shot. If you're in unbelievable shape and you're strong, and that's why you do all the training. You can put yourself in a position to win against a better person. So
yeah, it's funny because the World Championships were just this weekend, and did you follow them? Yeah, and it seems that now the United States has kind of distanced itself from the rest of the world. It seems to me like the best guy didn't even compete, and they still won it by the second day. Like Gable Stevenson wasn't even there, and they still, I think they locked it up before the last day. Well, exactly. Exactly. And there was 3 other medalists that could have represented the United States, but represented other countries, a gold medal, a silver, and a bronze. And I can't help but think that this is kind of like a full cycle. Now it's probably been maybe 5 years since the rules have changed. And I think that the fact that they're 2 3-minute periods, and when I was wrestling, it was the 2 2 2. You only had to win 2 periods. Do you remember those rules? That wasn't long ago. That was 2000, I think 17 or 18 they switched that. And I think that now that cardio has come back into the sport, the United States, because they're used to the college grind, I think that that's why they're pulling ahead of Russia, because they always say like, oh, Russia's so technical. They're way more technical than us, but we're having the results that Russia does not have right now. And I think that maybe because cardio is part of it again. When I was wrestling, it wasn't. Luckily for me, I didn't have great cardio, so it played in my advantage. But do you think that that's accurate, or maybe you haven't thought about that?
I think that's part of it, but I do think we have some great wrestlers in these. There's a lot of reasons. I think the RTCs and having these kids being able to make some money. I mean, you remember what it was like, and you're hardly making any money. You're trying to coach. Now there's opportunities for these kids to, with those RTCs to earn money and just train. And that model seems to work, right? They train at these different RTCs, get together before the World Championships. But we have some freaks, man. These kids, I mean, just look at, we mentioned Taylor and Kyle Dake was a 4-time state champ, 4-time national champ. I mean, wow, right? So it's like these kids are so good. It's we just have really good guys too. I think it's all of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Conditioning, skill.
yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's an economic component attached to it because when I was wrestling, people were not staying long. Maybe one cycle, two cycles, but no one had any money. Like no one had any money. It was just impossible to do. But now these guys live really well, so they could continue to wrestle into their, early 30s or mid 30s, some of them. And I don't think that that was a thing, maybe, 10, 15 years ago or before that. So I think that there is an economic component attached to it because now these guys could have like a career. And you see this in jiu-jitsu now too. Like jiu-jitsu back in the day, the best guys would win a world championship or an ADCC championship, then have to try to get into fighting. And fighting is not for everyone, but they would try to make money. And same with wrestling. Like there'd be great wrestlers, then they'd, I'm going to try the UFC. But now you don't necessarily have to. I think that there is a.
Exactly. Look at the guys that are winning. They're earning a living, a really good living, and they don't have to go fight. Like, yeah, before, like you said, it's like, the next step is I want to go make money. I got to fight. There is another part of it, and I don't know why. If you really look at some of the athletes we have, right? So, back in the day, I don't know, think back to when you were in college, how many like superstars were there? There was maybe one or two. Like, I don't know. I'm just looking next year, going into the year. Well, the Cornell kid's still in college. So he's a world champ in college, right?
Yeah.
You got, I know at least two kids at Penn State are going for their fourth NCAA title, right? So some of these guys are bubbling up and we're getting better and better guys, right? So it's like, excuse me, like, holy moly, you might see a four-timer once in a while, and now it's like we have two in 1 year, maybe.
Right.
And are we getting better and better guys, athletes involved in wrestling? I don't know. I don't study it that much, but I know we have a lot of superstars in the college ranks, and I think they're just bubbling up into freestyle wrestling.
Yeah, I think
Well, I
that's
think
right.
also too, from like an outsider that doesn't know as much about wrestling, it seems like obviously, that every sport, as years go on, the athletes get better just with time and everything, and they're training differently and all that. But also, I think just the sport of wrestling has grown so much from when I was in high school. Now it's huge. Like my high school team has like a girls team now. I'm like, that's insane. They like, I didn't go to a huge high school. We don't even have lacrosse, but we have women's wrestling now. And like you said, now there's all these superstars. Like even people know girl wrestlers too. And like, you know what I mean? If there's girl wrestlers that have names and so many different guys, and they can have personalities just like in MMA. So then I think that reaches out to younger kids and they see it and they think it's cool. And then some of them go into UFC, and that like correlation, they're, on TV and they see them doing all that. And I think that, it being more popular, there's more kids that are doing it, so it's getting more competitive, and then they're better athletes. Where maybe kids were super athletic and they've gravitated more towards football because that was super popular. Now maybe they're kind of gravitating more towards wrestling, and it's making it more
The
competitive.
UFC's definitely played a big part in advertising.
The UFC has helped wrestling tremendously. It's like, well, when you have guys like Joe Rogan and he's like, well, the best base is wrestling.
Right.
Now you have, I don't know, you have a dad and he's like, I better put my kid in wrestling so he can defend himself. And, who knows why, but wrestling does seem to be talked about a lot. And I think the UFC is just, it's just helping. But I think there's just more people coming into it, and you can appreciate this. The UFC is getting harder and harder because now you're opening up to these other countries. And so instead of like only the United States and this country fighting, now it's like, now you got these fighters from Mexico. And I know you're going down there and opening some performance thing down there, right? And now Dana White's talking about that in Africa. And you got all these fighters from Russia now coming into the UFC. I'm telling you, in 5 years, it's like being a UFC champion will mean a whole, like, it'd be way harder than it was even, today. And I think just as more and more people get into it, and wrestling's the same way, it's like there's, I don't know how many billion, 12 billion people or whatever on the earth. It's like when more and more are fighting or when more and more are wrestling, you're going to get a better and better product. So, which is, good if I can get some of those guys on our team.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of brings me my next thing. This is a huge change since I was wrestling. Has the NIL affected your coaching, or is that only in the super, super big programs? Like, I mean, you're at a big school, but not like a Penn State. Like, has it affected you guys?
It affects us. There's a couple kids who have some NIL deals, and I think you have to be conscious of their, abilities to earn money and help them when you can, and guide them. But, we have a collective as everyone else does. And, but it's part of the sport now,
Right.
And it also affects you because, with the transfer rules, you've gotta, I'm never going to be just like, hugging the kids and, oh, you did a great job when you didn't, if you want to leave that bad, see you later. But you do have to spend more time with the kids and be on top of them, because the kids, it's like a child, this, if I could leave or transfer it out of my house, I would have done it about 9,000 times every time my dad cracked me. Right. So you've got to be in tune with where they're at. Right. But it has affected us. There are kids on NIL deals, and it's just part of it. We got to raise money for that. So it's just all part of the sport.
So now every year is just like you could transfer at any time every year. You could wrestle at a new school every year, basically. Is that accurate?
You get a one-time transfer, and they say they're cracking down now because it was a free-for-all.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a one-time transfer, and then if you graduate, you can transfer as a grad and go to grad school somewhere.
But a one-time transfer, it could be within your division. It could be within your. It's like no questions asked. You could just go.
Yeah, there may still be some, Big 10, Big 12, but yeah, for the most part.
So can an athlete now?
You know what I mean? I don't like it, but I see the reason for it.
Yeah, of course.
It sucks as a coach, but it's like, I don't know, you can pick up and you both can be down here tomorrow working in West Virginia, and I can leave and right. I guess there's things within your contract, but yeah, it's America. So I see both sides of the argument. So, I'm kind of a fence sitter.
So like if you have a NCAA champion this year, hopefully you do, and a big booster at Penn State says, oh, can he actively recruit one of your guys and say, well, we have this booster, he'll give you, $500,000 to wrestle for us next year. Can that happen?
Can it happen? Yes. Is it supposed to happen? No.
But it has to happen though, right?
Yeah, what happens is people find ways around rules and laws all the time, right? So, if you're dirty, you find a way around it. If you're clean, you don't do it. I don't recruit off of rosters, but there's people out there that probably do it. And, it's pretty hard to find out if Kyle Sermonara knows a guy on Texas Tech's wrestling team, right? And I know Kyle, and I'm like, hey, we got $100,000 for this guy. It's just impossible to track that.
Right. Because it could be something, just their likeness. Be like, oh, I have a big clothing company. I want to sponsor you, but only if you wrestle. So the third party could essentially recruit him, no questions asked, right?
Yeah. So I don't know how to fix, that, but I just focus on our program.
Right.
Right.
But yeah, but you know what though? It's just a different era. There's always been dirty people. Now there's just a different thing going on. Hey, now we can give them NIL money. There was always dirtiness though. Maybe the transfer rules, if they were a little stricter, like, hey, you got to sit a year, maybe that would curb some of that part of it.
Yeah.
So I don't know anything about it. That's why I'm kind of asking you. I just hear just very little. But I saw just the other day, and I don't watch college football, but you always see like Deion Sanders like things, and he said he's like I will not recruit high school athletes. He's like it's too much of a risk. He's like I only am gonna recruit the portal. He's like why take a risk on a 17-year-old kid who's only played high school ball when the portal's filled with guys with experience who could perform at this level. I know college football is way insane bigger market and way more money, but do you think that that's a strategy that coaches will start following? Like, because why would you recruit a high school kid that has a risk, that is essentially a risk, when you could recruit the portal?
Well, I think there's two high school kids. Sometimes you're going to recruit kids that you feel aren't risks. They're good students, good kids, and you do your homework. And then they're really good wrestlers. So you try to eliminate that risk with doing your homework. But yeah, that's where this NIL, it's like the kids that are going in the portal in years past. So a while ago, if somebody was transferring, you were like, wow, did he get in trouble? Did he get kicked off? What's he doing wrong? Something's up.
Right.
Now it's not that they can't make the team. It's not that they're getting in trouble. It's they want more money.
Right.
And they get it. And people can argue that, say that's not it, but that's exactly it, right?
Of course.
Why all of a sudden the uptick in transfers?
Right.
They all just want a different major at a different school. It's this NIL thing. And so if you do a good job somewhere and you're not happy and you can transfer, you can go get paid somewhere else. It's and the thing I don't like the most about it is even the NFL, there's a salary cap.
Right.
If you won the lottery, the Sermonar family wants to give me $100 million. There's no cap, right? I can pay as many kids as much money. I say you could give it to our collective, or some business could, right? Your business, you're not a donor to West Virginia. You can hire these people to work for your company or be ambassadors for your company. There's just ways to do it, and there's no cap. There's no cap. It's name, image, likeness. They can earn as much as they want, right? Or can. And again, though, and not to sound like I'm totally against it, I think kids should be able to make money. You remember, it's like if you're an All-American, you shouldn't get the same money at a camp that the backup wrestler's making when you're like, you know what I mean? So I understand and I agree with so much of it, but it's like out of control.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably not as crazy in wrestling. Football's got to be crazy.
It's crazy, man. And maybe basketball a little bit.
So we're probably losing listeners with this. This is pretty into the weeds, but I'll just do one hypothetical. If Elon Musk took over a program and had all the money in the world, but he's the only coach, but he could just buy all the best players or all the best athletes, but their room now is coached by Elon Musk. Are they the best team in the country? All the best college wrestlers, but they're coached now by Elon Musk.
All right, so I don't have to get everyone yelling at me tomorrow. If he could I won't name any names. If he could offer the best wrestlers in the country right now, if they're making $50,000 from an NIL deal, if they could offer them $500,000, would those kids transfer?
I think so. Yeah.
$1 million. He's a billionaire.
Right.
Hey, Kyle, you're an All-American at Buffalo. Come down here. I'll give you $500,000
yeah, you're going, but you know, but the back end of it, but it is obviously it's a hypothetical. Do you think that those athletes can still be the best with like not as good coaching? It's like nurture or nature. Yeah. No, I'm saying if he's just the coach, they would, right? Because they could push each other. They're already. But I think if you now let's say you could only recruit Elon could only do that from Fargo, the high school kids.
That's different.
So the best they get the number one every Fargo champ or every guy he wants. That level, I don't think that they're getting, even if it's a room of 10 Fargo champs or 50 Fargo champs, you know, every year.
So think about what we were talking about. Now the level is different. So now when you come out of high school, you're going to have, well, this guy was a junior world champ. That's different than just Fargo champ.
Right.
Right.
He won the junior. He's a 4-time state champ. I'm not trying to downplay what we do. I mean, you need coaching, but I'm saying if you stuffed a room full of Fargo junior world medalists, 4-time state champs, they're gonna grind each other maybe into, you know, having some success.
I don't think that team wins, me personally. I don't think they do. With no real guidance, even a team of junior world champs, I don't think that they get it done at the nationals.
I think if they
competing
have
against,
if they all have experience being coached at, even for like 1 year at college, then, you know, and I'm sure it's a lot different than high school.
But if it's no college experience, I don't think they get it done.
Well, yeah, it just depends, you know, or some of these kids are coming out and they've already been at the Olympic Training Center and you know, the coaches out there had their hands on them and brought them overseas. And these kids are a little more seasoned maybe than you and I were coming out of high school.
So, right. Okay.
Elon Musk can come and help. You can be an assistant here if you want.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. A topic that gets tossed around a lot in our world, the jiu-jitsu world, fighting world. And I take a different position on it than most. And Caitlin is on my side too, but is weight cutting. And everyone talks about how bad it is and it shouldn't be allowed. What are your thoughts? Like, because there's an organization in Asia, 1FC, and they pretty much outlawed weight cutting. You have to pass hydration tests the day of weigh-ins. It's almost like the certification thing in NCAA wrestling, but it's pretty strict. You have to weigh in hydrated. So a lot of people think that that's the way to go in the UFC and there shouldn't be weight cutting. And what's your thoughts on weight cutting? It's a pretty talked about issue in our world.
I think in any sport, especially when you know, there's weight classes, you got to get to the weight that you perform the best at. And you can't just walk around and eat whatever you want and compete at that weight. I mean, it's just not realistic, right? So if Blunt Fighter has to cut 10 pounds to be at her ideal weight, then good. And if I got to cut 20, good. But I don't see anything wrong with losing weight if you do it the right way. You know, you're not dehydrating for 6 days. You're not eating for a month or a week. You're limiting your food. You're certainly limiting some liquids, and you rip it off at the end. And these athletes are used to sweating. It's like, cripe, I'm 100 years old and I sweat every day. It's like they're used to it. I think the average person's like, wow, they lost whatever. Well, you know, Mitchell Port could lose 8-10 pounds in one practice. Yeah, he's thirsty at the end, but he's not. You say somebody else, you're like, oh my God. So I don't see anything wrong with it. And it's part of sport. It's part of being disciplined. You know, hey, I got to be a little more disciplined. And you know, we talked about this earlier, like maybe ways that I can get guys that are not as gifted, well, they're more disciplined, right? So this guy cuts weight just a little wrong and he tires himself out and he runs too much or sweats too much. My guy does it the right way. It's like you said, conditioning is an equalizer. Well, that's all part of your conditioning, right? So that's an equalizer. And that gives, I always say the average guy, but that gives, someone less gifted a shot, right? So I think it's all part of it. And I think it's great for like our sport for kids to learn how to be disciplined, And I can tell you this, I appreciate cold water when I'm hot because I did, not always get to drink every drop I wanted after practice. So there's a lot of good in it, So I'm not against weight cutting. I mean, what do? You just whatever you weigh.
I'm so happy that I asked that, and I'm so happy with your answer because we've talked about this a lot, and people have asked questions, and I basically said the exact same thing. I've always described it as this, like, if you know how to properly dehydrate, and then also with fighting, you have a chance to actually rehydrate. You have 24 hours. And then you could take off 20 pounds and then put on 25 after. And now you're going into the cage 25 pounds heavier. That is an advantage. And I think that losing weight and putting weight back on is as much of a skill as any other component of the sport. And having the ability to like lose all the weight and put it back on is also like an inherent like physical trait, like speed or explosiveness for some people. Some people, like if you watch Aljamain Sterling fight, I don't know if you follow him, but he's way bigger than everyone in his weight class. It's not even close. And I think it's such an advantage. And I think that you could almost, that's something that you could weaponize. Like people say weaponize pace if you have good cardio, and Caitlin falls in that category too. She loses for a girl probably as much as anyone on the roster, but she's had tremendous success because she's much bigger than everyone. She's, has a significant reach advantage. I think that if your body doesn't handle cutting weight well, then don't cut weight and move up. But I think that not often, but there's lots of examples of that guy, Piera. Have you watched him fight? He fights 185 and he steps in the cage at 220. How do you beat that guy? Right. Yeah, exactly.
I agree with what you said about it being disciplined because I think in both sports, people, and it's always kind of the people that aren't competing or never have compete, but they're always like, oh, it's so unhealthy. It's so bad for the sport. It's like, well, no one's required to cut weight. You can I can move up. I can fight 20 pounds heavier if I want. I can ask to go down even lower. You're not like required to do it. So like for me, I think it's like, I always say, they're like, how do you cut all the weight? I'm like, oh, it's not really that. I mean, it's annoying, but it's not that hard. It's just like you said, it's just discipline. Because I've been around other people that are, maybe even smaller than me and they fight a weight class heavier. And I see them like losing because they're heavy or because they're smaller in that weight class. And I'm like, yeah, but they don't want to have to weigh their food out. They don't want to have to eat clean. I'm like, oh, well, you don't have to. That's fine. But you're going to lose and you're not going to be good because you don't have the discipline to like not eat pizza. And to me, I'm like, if this is your career, you're getting paid for, like, that's insane. But you don't have to do it. Not everyone does. I just think it's, for that, it just comes down to discipline. Like, I don't think naturally I have like the greatest like physical like attributes, but I think that like being disciplined, I work hard, and the people are like, oh, you have good cardio. I'm like, well, because I train 3 times a day, and I don't naturally have good cardio. I train really hard to do that, and then I'm big in the weight class because I'm not super strong naturally, so I make sure I'm the biggest person. So that's just kind of the discipline helps kind of make up for the other things.
But it gives you a chance to compete with the very best because of all those and like you said, those are skills, and I think that's just part of, if it's just going to be just weigh in, well, then the single best athletes, then you're not going to see it's not there's going to be no mental it's going to be all physical, right?
physical.
The single best, most explosive, naturally leanest guy or girl is going to win, right? But when you start throwing in conditioning, diet, like when I go to sleep, giving up booze, giving up whatever, that makes, I just think that's all part of sport. I used to think there was no, I'm getting in trouble for this too. I didn't think it was a sport unless you breathed hard and had to give up something, right? And you know, most sports you have to sacrifice time from your friends. But yeah, I just think it's all part of it. And that's a piece that you can control. And clearly you have, because it's helping you, right? And it's like that gives everybody else reason to be disciplined. It's like, well, if she can do it, that'll help me, right? And then, of course, you get someone like Sterling, who's not only disciplined and cuts the weight, but he's also a really good athlete. And then you got that's why he gives a lot of people a lot of problems, right?
Right.
So,
right.
yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, I don't mind it. Do I think people should starve themselves for days on end? No. Do I think they should cut 30 pounds of water? Absolutely not. Our sport's slightly different. We have a 1 hour weigh-in.
Right.
So
it's a lot different.
But like Caitlin said, it's like, and I think you said, Kyle, it's a skill and you have to figure it out. Rehydrating isn't just about weighing 20 more pounds.
Right.
If your belly hurts,
exactly,
and I feel bloated and slow, maybe it's better to be 12 pounds and be disciplined not to eat another meal before you go fight, right? Maybe my optimum weight is plus 10. Yours is plus 15. You're a bigger guy, plus 20. Like, that's all in that trial and error you talked
right.
about. And that's why you more when you're younger, so you know, this is what I do. I tell our guys, it's like, you should, by the middle of the year, you should be like, I wrestle at 157. Usually we start at 25. We weigh in this at this time. I get 2 bottles of water, 1 apple, 1/2 of a sandwich, whatever your system is. And I feel pretty good. And I don't deviate because I know if I have another glass of water, right, my belly hurts. And then I'm slow, or I got to pee when I'm wrestling, whatever it is. So figuring that out is part of sport. So I'm not against cutting weight.
I think all that goes back to competing a lot. Like growing up and coming up, the more, or even a seasoned college wrestler, if you only wrestle at the conferences and the nationals, you don't have that in tune, because you might be able to make the weight, but putting the weight back on, what you eat after the weigh-ins, is kind of equally as important. Maybe not quite as important, because if you don't make the weight, you can't compete. So, but it's right there. Like, you have to know exactly what you need to put into your body as much as you took out of your body to make the weight. I think it's also like when I was wrestling, and me and Gregor talk about this a lot, like back then there was no, did kids use the science and the technology that's offered today, like the nutrition, that there's so many like podcasts and experts on nutrition. I didn't know anything. You know, do kids use that nowadays?
No,
not as many. And there's so much. We have a nutrition person on staff with the athletic department, right? And she'll come in and she talks to our guys like once a week, which I think is great, for like 10 minutes. And we found this is best for our team. Instead of coming in and giving a hour lecture, she comes in and she'll talk about, hey, this is why hydration is important, after practice, or this is the importance of carbohydrates after a workout. This is what it does. We had, this is our old nutritionist, came in and just showed like, hey, this is how much sugar. She was holding up that little sandwich baggies. This is how much sugar is in a soft drink. This is how much sugar is in this. This is how much sugar is in a beer. Like, and just to show these kids like, and kind of like open their eyes to it. But I still don't think even our team takes advantage. There's apps on your phone. You can just enter everything in. Wait, but I think more kids have to, but you know what? They're generally like, I feel okay. This is how I always did it. And, this is, and we talk all the time about being a pro. Our 25 pounder, he didn't win the nationals, a couple time All-American, just a professional, right? Early practice, stretching. He's doing all these crazy things with this hammer over his head. And, and everyone's like, well, he's crazy. Yeah, he's crazy. And he's really good. And after practice, he's in hot tub, cold tub, hot tub, cold tub. So it's a commitment, right? And that's what we keep talking about. Commitment of time before practice, commitment after. Then he eats certain things and he comes in and his mouth's all blue from some supplement. And everyone's like, wow, he's a freak. Yeah, and he never gets tired. And he works his ass off. Like, yeah, and what they always don't realize is sometimes the part that's a freak is the commitment part. Like,
Right.
blonde fighter is a freak. And she'd say, no, I'm not overly fast, or I wasn't overly strong. She's a freak with her commitment.
She is.
And so you have to be really good. And I've studied this and I have these little like things like you have to be good in strength and conditioning, all these things. But this commitment part and your nutrition and your sleep, are you willing to give up Netflix at night and video games? And so all these things you get a score in, right? So Caitlin might think like, well, I'm a 6 in strength, but she's a 10 in commitment. And she's a 10 in this area. And it all adds up to a pretty damn good fighter, right? So you got to have, at the end of the day, your score has to be X or you're not going to be very good. And those numbers can come from anywhere.
So the average of all those. What are those components that you have?
Strength, conditioning, commitment, sleep, nutrition, mental attitude. Like so you add all these things and you can have your own thing and then you just score fighters or you score wrestlers, right? And this is where, again, where that, is it mental or is it physical? Well, if I have natural conditioning and I'm an 8, whether I do anything, he's got an 8 already, right? Strength. I'm an explosive freak. Well, I get a 10. Well, now I already got 18 out of whatever number it is. And that's where the physical, if you score a 2 and a 2, but I'm mentally tough, you're never going to have a high enough number to win. And so, go through and pick attributes and score UFC fighters or score wrestlers, and the guys with the super, this kid was so tough, but he's just not fast and he trips over his feet. And so you get a 2 and a 3 and a 2. His max score is like 30 under being a state champion or whatever. So I've never really done it to like give to everybody, but I've told our guys, and I think I have it on my phone, like, and I might even have it. Let me look. But it's like, score yourself in these areas. And I just scribbled down a couple. Talent, work ethic, wrestling skill, lifestyle, and mental toughness was the last one I sent out, right? And so you can add in. So I put like lifestyle, I throw nutrition and sleep. And so you can have more areas than just it's a higher score. So it's not a perfect science, but you just tell people to score themselves, work ethic, wrestling skill, which, it might be natural strength, lifestyle, and mental toughness, and I rolled talent into one number. And talent in our discussion tonight may include speed. So you might have a 10, strength, you might have a 10. And I think that's how important talent is at the highest level, right? So it's not just talent 110 because you're strong and fast and have good cardio. It could be 30 points, 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10. So then lifestyle, Tim Flynn can't make up with it with lifestyle, mental toughness, and skill. because I just don't have enough strength, explosion, pop, right? Conditioning. So, but it's a good thing for people to kind of analyze themselves. And it's a good thing for younger athletes. Well, I know I'm not the fastest or the strongest, so I better damn well have these other areas in that 10 zone. And I think that's what your wife's done. She's made, herself way up here. And again, I'm not calling her a bad athlete. She said she wasn't naturally strong, not me.
Yeah, no,
but she had these other areas, right? So,
it's funny when you say the bad athlete. That's all amazing stuff, though. That's so good. I love that so much. That score. Like, I'll get into what I was about to say, but the value, the cumulative value, because sometimes you'll hear even like in like Instagram stuff, but like be a high value male. So you can be like worth $10 million, but if you're fat and out of shape and you have no personality, you have a 10 in finance, but then you're gross to look at and you're, boring to talk to. Now you have like a 3, and a 10. So you're not really a high value male. You're just high value financially. But I think if you're, if you're worth, 1 million and you're funny and in shape and a good person, the sum is better than its parts.
Morals, ethics, work ethic. I don't know. Do you run around on your spouse? So it's the same thing. It's like, so what kind of husband are you? Or what kind of father are you? And it's the same thing. Score yourself.
Same thing.
And like you said, hey, yeah, you know what? I'm a really hard worker and I make a good living, but I'm never home. I run around and cheat on my wife.
Right.
And I'm and so then as a person, as a husband, your average is a C at best.
Right.
Yeah.
People would value more the morals, ethics, role model, right? Maybe the money and some other things. I mean, I do think you should be able to take care of your family, but everybody has a different like scale system. And again, so, clearly, blonde fighter's looking for a husband. Looks isn't high on her list. So, she obviously says good worker, good guy, but no, but yeah. So that, I think you always should be looking at life like that and trying
So
to.
smart.
So smart.
So smart.
That's why I think like whatever sport it is, I think like, obviously we're all, into sports, but I just think like for kids and stuff, like sports is so important, whether you go on to do it in college or, professional, even not just that. It's just, like you said, it forces you to look at yourself like at a young age, like, oh, hey, I'm not good at this, but if I work hard, and it just, there's so much to it that like, I remember growing up, my parents were like, it doesn't matter. You could pick whatever sport you want. We don't care, but you got to pick something. Like you have to do it. And like, I see people now, especially like, people our age that like are starting to have kids around that. And they're like, they're not really into anything. So they just don't really do it. I'm like, wait, it wasn't an option. Like you just do something like, and if you sign up for it, you don't have to keep doing it the rest of years, but you finish out the season because you signed up for it. They're like, they don't feel like going today or anything. I'm like, it's not daycare. It's like the sport and you make a commitment. I think that's so important because like you said, all the same, like scoring as an athlete is the same thing as a person when to be a good person.
I think it's important that they learn, even kids that aren't great athletes, you have to give up your TV time to go do this. And you don't always want to go, but you go because you're supposed to go and you have to go. And that's teaching them at a young age, even if you're not even a good athlete, never going to be an athlete. It teaches you, I got to go to work when I don't feel good, right? I got to go because I committed to this. And it just teaches kids a lot. Sport is one of the best things you can do for a kid. And even if they're not, now, obviously, if you have other kids, picking on them when they're little, I think that's awful. But sometimes that hardens a man too,
Totally.
Like I was called skinny and maybe that makes you work out a little harder, I don't
Right.
know it, but yeah, Sport is really good for kids, even just teamwork, right?
So we've taken a couple shots at Blonde Fighter not being athletic, but I think that she, and I've told her this so many times, she always confuses, and I'd like to hear your take on this, athleticism with explosiveness. Like, I'm an explosive, I'm fast for 100 yards. I could jump high, and I'm strong. But I think she's like so much more athletic than me because, like, when you put in, just like all the other things you were just saying about lifestyle, when you put in coordination, flexibility, condition, endurance, like those are all athletic traits. Like the coordination that she has and the flexibility, like I would love that because she thinks of athletes as just like a linebacker in the NFL.
I think of the combine, like, you know, doing the 40-yard dash, the high jump and all that. And I'm like, I'm awful at those.
I think in our sports, jiu-jitsu, fighting, wrestling, I don't know that the explosive, especially fighting, I don't agree with this at all.
Wrestling, it's pretty important.
For wrestling, I'll say freestyle or Greco-Roman wrestling. I think the explosive athlete usually wins. But I don't know that David Taylor is just an explosive. He's a flexible, coordinated guy. He is. But you know what I mean by that, Tim? Like, it's not just combine. If you're an NFL linebacker, yes. But for our sports, there's so many versions of athleticism. Like Ben Askren's like spatial awareness and his balance and always finding a way on top of the scrambles. Like that's a form of athleticism.
I agree. Yeah, no, you're 100% on the right track. And so you know, when I gave this to our guys, I dummied it down. So you could take, and I had talent as one thing. So within talent, you've already said explosiveness, power, but coordination, balance, right? And so all these things, and you don't have to be, I always tell kids this too. It's, you know, I don't know that Bruce was, you can be fast for like this far.
Right.
And not be fast. Like you were explosive.
Yes.
But, and I always tell people when you're faking in wrestling, everybody can fake fast because you only got to move that.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. Can anyone do it that much faster than me? I don't know.
Probably not.
Now, can somebody faster?
It's like snapping your fingers. That's all we're all doing.
Yeah. It's like, how much faster is somebody going to do? Yeah.
Right.
So you could, if we really were going to dive into this, Serm, we would blow up everything, right? Like, yeah, talent is really this 6 or 8 things, right? Coordination being one, and balance, and these other parts that people have. And just to be clear too, it was a while ago, but I do remember when Blonde Fighter was down in Edinboro working out, and she's not a bad athlete.
No.
By any right. I mean, top 5, but
but again, like probably why you're successful is you're comparing yourself to the most explosive people.
Oh, I'm number 5. I'm not the champion. You know what I mean? That's why I'm like.
Yeah, but you're not going to compare yourself to the secretary down the road at, you know, the accounting firm. Well, yeah, you're really explosive, right? You're comparing yourself to and this is what I tell our guys. So when you're rating 1 to 10, you're rating against, you know, if Serm's at 10 on explosiveness, I rate against that. You know, yeah, 99% of America, yeah, I'm way more explosive.
Right.
But I am not explosive.
It's fun. What you said there it's funny because this happened to me like last week. I'm considering doing this this big jujitsu tournament coming up, and I don't really compete in jujitsu, but I train it. But I don't, you know, I do MMA, so I'm like, I don't know. It's like I don't compete as much as everyone else that does it, and they're like, oh, you'll do awesome, you do good. They're like, you know, you always beat this person, and they name someone, and I'm like, and that girl's really, really good, and you always would like beat her. I'm like, yeah, but this tournament, the last year they had this tournament, she didn't win 1 match. And they're like, yeah, but she's ranked high. I'm like, she didn't win 1 match. And so that doesn't, I was like, you guys were trying to make me feel better. I was like, that makes me feel worse.
Kyle, you can appreciate this when like my wife or her family or friends say, "Hey, this kid down the road, he's really good," and I immediately the first two words, "How good?
How good?
How good.
How good?
Right.
Right.
Hey, tell me, where is he? Start at the national level and work your way down." And again, it's not to slam people, but yeah, when you're thinking up here, you can't compare yourself down here, right? Or then you get complacent. You would never work out if you were comparing yourself to, the average.
Well, that's like when people say like they'll say things like, "Well, you can't really talk because you're better than like 99% of the people." Like, stop. 99. That means 1 out of 100's better than me. Like, no. When you're talking like someone of her level or Gregor's level, it's 99.9999999. It's funny.
That's why Kyle has so many friends. He's so literal. And they're like, okay.
She hates when I do that.
I'm
but
like, just let it go. It's fine. He's like, that's 1 out of 100.
People don't understand percentages.
It's like the one time there was like a wrestler kid, and he's like, "Oh, this move always works."
Always.
And Kyle and I just hear it. I'm like, "Oh God, here we go." And Kyle goes, "Oh, it always works for you?" Or he's like, "Yeah, no one stops it." He goes, "No one?" He goes,
"That's Tim. I got that kind of from Tim."
And I'm like, I'm on the other side of the mat. I'm like, this poor kid. I'm like, here we go. And then he's like, "Oh, so you did it?" He's like, "You did that move at the state finals?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "Oh, at counties?" No. He goes, "Okay, so it doesn't work all the time." And he was like, and the kid was like, laughed it off. I'm like, oh my God.
We had a recruit, and I won't mention a name because I just would never do that. But kid was walking around. This is when I was at Edinboro, and he's like, "I've got this move no one can stop." And I was like, just like you said, I was like, I think he was 5th in the state. I didn't think he won. I'm like,
Yeah.
Somebody stopped it. So funny. With that athleticism, I'll just give a shout out to Gregor. He's the only athlete that I've ever worked with who's like a 10 explosive and a 10 cardio. Those things never go together. You know who else is like that actually is Daniel Cormier. People don't understand how good Daniel Cormier's cardio is.
Yeah, I do because I followed him in wrestling and I followed his UFC career. I think people see because he's a thick, burly guy.
Insane cardio.
Yeah.
But he is, yeah, and you don't think that when you see somebody built like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he unbelievable. When he wrestled, I think he had great cardio. He was
crazy.
Yes. And which makes him, a freak athlete. And
Yeah.
again, people think a freak athlete, like they look a certain way. He's got more of a stocky look, but he's a freak,
Totally. Yeah, those two things don't usually go well together. But usually it's one or the other, and if you could have a 7 cardio and a 10 explosive, you're great. But usually it's one sacrifices the other, it seems. Last thing I want to talk to you about with the wrestling, I haven't worked with like inexperienced kids for a very long time, but at our jiu-jitsu gym this past year, we've started like a high school program, and the guys we got are not good for the most part. There's a couple guys who've gotten a lot better.
You have a lot of kids that have only wrestled for like 2 years.
Yeah, so it's I've only worked with like elite kids like in private lessons over the years since I've gotten out of coaching, or like professional athletes, professional jiu-jitsu guys. So I've tried over the past year, and I think that maybe I've learned this from you, but I remember you, like when you run a circuit training where you're doing like airdyne to this, to this, to this, I think what you're really doing there is you're putting the things on the board that they have to execute as the must-have you must be able to mat return someone. Stop shot, go behind. You must be able to stop shot, go behind. Someone in on a single leg, stuff head, square hips. Have an attack on both sides of the body, get off bottom. I think those are the 6 things that I try to, before you could even put in like a turn or anything. Like I think that it's very important to simplify wrestling down to like not necessarily moves, but situations that every single person, and if you can't stop a shot with your head and hands, you can't really get into other things. That needs to be day one, because if someone just takes you down every time they shoot, it doesn't matter how good your shot is, right? So do you have, I'll call it like must-have skills?
Yeah, I think you need a go-to takedown. And so that's evolved probably when I was younger. I didn't think this way, but go-to takedown, like maybe yours was underhook, right? And it doesn't have to be a leg attack, just a go-to takedown. You got to be able to defend your legs. You have to be able to get off the bottom. And I think you get those general areas right. Attacking both sides of the body, yeah, it's important. Being able to score from the front headlock, yeah, and get the guys off your leg if they get your leg. So there's a couple areas, and it's just like our little scoring thing. You can start to blow it up, like, you know, leg attack defense. Well, that's also if he's in on my leg,
Right.
you know, God forbid he gets through my head and hands, he gets my leg. I got to have some kind of ability to square my hips, stuff his head, post his knees, get my hips back off, you know, come down off the position. So yeah, there's some basic things like that, but I always put those in. I think so. Being able to execute those things when breathing hard, and that's a big part of our sport too. And
Right.
and you can have different levels of intensity, right? You can a medium ride, a hard sprint, but being able to breathe. I think there's something in sport, and I tell our guys when we're sprinting and doing stuff, being able to like think when you're tired. Like our guys are like, what? I'm like, you can't do that. You know, at the NCAA tournament, you can't not know the score. I mean, does it happen occasionally? I get it. You know, we've all been athletes, you know, all lost track. You don't know the time. You don't know where you're at. And this is where you talk about Gregor had phenomenal mat sense. Like just being able to score on the edge and drag a guy in and just know, like, and you can't, I don't know if I can teach that, right?
Right.
But I do think like, yeah, you can train yourself to know what's going on and be good in these, you know, core basic things when you're tired. And I think it's vital really for wrestling. But you know, I'm sure in the fights, it's like you can't after the, you know, round, you can't spend 15 minutes looking for your corner, right? You got to know what's going on, and yeah, you got to be able to listen and take instruction when you're breathing hard. And it's the same in every sport.
Last thing, I don't want to keep you all night. I could talk to you forever, but how much has the technique that you teach today, how much has that changed since 2000? Do you follow like the trends, or do you study like what's working now, or how much have you changed in the last 23 years, 25 years? Not a ton.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch a world championships, you know, single legs, double legs, stopping a shot like you talked about, going behind, stuff still works. The go behind. Do some people have some tricks and some extraordinary moves? Absolutely. But when you're coaching the mass, right? So I think now we find some kids with some different feels. You know, they have these shin whizzers and these Jonesy tilts.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do that. So, you know, Jordan Titus or I don't know, some kids on our team can do it better than I can. So I can't really show them.
Right. I see some things, a huge thing that I see when I still watch a lot of wrestling just so I could be a good coach, because I'm not seeing it every day like you, but I still follow. The reattacks now seem to be like the most important thing, I think. Everything I see is always like, you can't shoot on someone without almost getting taken down. It feels like everyone's stop shot, re-shot or just run the corner like Gable Stevenson does. Those guys, that stop shot, re-shot, I see guys score with that more than like clearing one arm and shooting or posting. I feel like I see that more. Is that accurate or no?
Oh, I think it's always been there, but I can tell you, someone was arguing with me about the 3-point takedown,
Oh yeah.
and they're like, well, people, because of what you said, they're like, well, now people will take less risk instead of like,
so.
oh, I can go get 3. Oh my gosh, he might run behind me and get 3. So I don't know. Everyone always asks about those rules, and I'm just like, listen, hey, you saw it with the freestyle. The best guys are the best guys.
Yeah.
3-minute periods, 2-minute periods, best 2 out of 3, 5-minute match, not 5-minute match. Force
I
part
think
tear.
the times change outcomes more than points.
If you
make it
5-minute periods, a different
athlete's going to win. In my opinion,
in general, I 100% agree with you. I'm talking at the high end, they figure it out.
Yeah.
David Taylor's going to figure it out, right? You make it a 1-minute match, he's going to figure it out. Kyle Dake's going to figure it out. Like these high end athletes, I don't know, pick a UFC fighter. They're going to figure it out.
Is there any rule change to make NCAA wrestling that you would like? In your dream situation, anything you'd do different? There's been a lot of talk about different rules.
I'd have to think about my team and what would make West Virginia win.
I have one, but just because of what we've been doing the last 10 years, and I'd like this to be like across the board. I always say this, collegiate wrestling, because I'm going to blend jiu-jitsu and wrestling right now. Collegiate wrestling, the pin ends the match, both shoulder blades touch the mat, it's over. But same scoring, there's back points of 15-point tilt if your back's exposed, or 15-point tech if your back's exposed, but all submissions are legal. That's the sport that I want. I want jiu-jitsu to have regular wrestling so you could beat them on points, so wrestling is more intertwined with jiu-jitsu. I want it to be grappling. What's that?
So the jiu-jitsu person couldn't just fall to their back because they're going to give up back.
They could fall to their back, but if both shoulder blades touch, and if you do that 3 times, you get or 5 times, you get tech falled. So you're doing it at the risk of maybe I'll submit them, or maybe I'll get pinned, or maybe I'll get tech falled. So there's no more wrestling and jiu-jitsu, it's just grappling. And that's the sport that I would want to see. All submissions legal.
Wrestling.
What? Huh? I think that would be the best sport ever, because jiu-jitsu, every tournament is a different rule set. And they always want to like combine more wrestling, but it's almost impossible because like the takedown's not that valuable. So I would like collegiate wrestling, same points, same everything. A pin ends the match, but also you could choke them out, you could triangle them without getting your back. That's the rule set that I want to see. You're not in the jiu-jitsu world enough to probably know, but that's my rules.
I like any kind of scrapping, but I can tell you why people like the UFC, or at least why I like it. It's like there's that part of I know it's a technical, and I don't want to make it not sound technical. The brutality, think about, I know fans like when wrestlers are getting rough and shoving out of bounds and right, getting closer to like a fight. How can we make the rules like it's a rougher thing without kids getting hurt, cheap, not turning it into a fight? How can you make it rougher? Because I think people like it. Like I remember when the Brands wrestled and everybody loved, they're ramming people out of bounds and without being cheap. I don't want people to get hurt. And so I don't know how, but I think more people would watch.
I think so too. Yeah, I think the submission threat would help that. I think that would be kind of cool. But I mean, it's so far like.
Or how about this? Forget the submission grappling, just the punching.
Well, that's
just MMA,
right?
right?
Oh, MMA,
Oh, MMA, no
submission.
submissions.
No submission. You're not allowed to choke somebody. You're not allowed to twist his arm.
Oh, but
Oh, but
the guy
shooting in, you could uppercut him and knock him out.
Yeah. Punch him in
You
the
want,
face.
you want more ground and pound, basically.
I do like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be cool. So
I'm
maybe
a
just
big
MMA
UFC
is the answer. MMA is probably the answer.
But thank you so much, man. This was amazing. Actually, the last thing. What do you?
No, I just want to say one thing. It's so funny, like, you know, we've only talked a few times, but like hearing you talk, especially when it's specifically about wrestling, it's like when I hear Kyle and Gregor talk like about wrestling or anything, like, oh, how would training go today, or whatever, any type of wrestling conversation. Like, I don't know if just from being around you, I feel like they've picked up so much of like your mannerisms and the way you talk. Cause I'm like, oh my God, it's Gregor and Kyle. Like some of the stuff you say and just how you say it and stuff. I think that they've, you know, I know that they're like always talking about you. Like your name in our house is always coming up all the time, especially when him and Gregor are together. Yeah. So it's just, it's nice to see. I'm like, oh wow. Cause I know how much they respect you. And then just seeing, you know, hearing you talk more and stuff, I'm like, oh my God, they've got so much from you, you know, from all the years of being around you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I know we don't talk a ton anymore or so much. We're both busy, but yeah, I respect you so much. I learned so much from you, and I like really in my life, I would say I have 2 regrets. One was not wrestling for you in college. Then the other one was business related. But I really only have 2 regrets in my whole life, but that's one of them. But you know,
I can tell you, I regretted that too, that you didn't come to wrestle for us. But I'll say this about Kyle. From really day one, we always, and I'll say this about Lou, you know, and we always were kind of on the same page with the training, the thinking alike. I think Gregor was a little more, you know, he evolved, you know, he was underneath, you know, obviously Kyle came from somewhere else, from University of Buffalo, but I just felt like we always kind of thought similar, not on everything, obviously, right? But and I always said that to my wife about Lou. I was like, we just always were in sync, wrestling wise. Like, I don't know. It's like, and not that you look for yes men, but it's like, what do you think we should do today? You know, I think we should do this. And it was like, yeah, we were kind of on the same page, I felt like, and thought similar. But I think like-minded people kind of end up kind of coming together. It's like, yeah, hard work and discipline and all the things we believe in, you know, of course you're going to get along with somebody. So, but yeah, I miss you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. We got to stay in touch a little better, but really, really appreciate this. I hope people like it, but I loved it, even if I'm the only one. But,
I love it.